All right, so here's our path to World War II, and we're going to start by how the Western democracies, namely the United States, the UK, and France, stumbled. And it all begins with the Treaty of Versailles. I feel like I've hit on this so much, but at the end of it ends World War I, which is great, but it also sets up World War II. Just like this political cartoon shows, the Big Four are trying to get Germany to eat it, and he's really strangled to do so, and it's an impossible peace term, really. So doesn't set them up well at all for success, which you want your enemy successful. That's kind of hard, right? But you might want it to be stable at least. Anyways, so three things. It's German embarrassment. That's the big thing. They were blamed for the war, and they were punished for it. There was huge war reparations that were difficult to handle, especially when the Great Depression hits. And it excluded German delegates, so they didn't get a say in it, and then were forced basically to sign it. After the Treaty of Versailles, it was there was still fear and aggression, and what we see is this military fortification along Germany and France. So here's an example of the Maginot Line. All right, and so this is the inside of it. So it's actually really cool that they have all these stores and elevators and everything to power the guns and whatnot. So you can actually still visit some of this and get tours. But what it was is it was a line of defense along the Germany-French border. Okay, that was France's major concern. And they did have defenses along Belgium, but not as strong. Not like these, cannon hills and large turrets that we see here. So why, again, France feared Germany invasion, but also, it didn't work. That's the point I'm going to get to. It did work a little bit. Yes, they couldn't come directly across what happened just like World War One. They go through Belgium. Okay, they go through Belgium and they use blitzkrieg. So these fortifications don't work well when you have a very fast-paced war, especially if you're just able to go around it. Okay. Here's a video about it. Please watch it. And I'm going to skip ahead, though. All right, you're going to watch that on your own. All right, so the question is, well, how do you stop World War II? Right, so the League of Nations was one way. This idea of a general association of nations, kind of like a United Nations, right? You could peacefully resolve your problems because there's this idea of collective security where, if you attack one, you're attacking all, and it's just best to talk it out, all right, or just come to an agreement. All right, let's be adults about this. But it fails for three reasons. Germany and Russia were excluded. Okay, and then the U.S. failed to join. The president wanted it, but Congress didn't. They were leery of being pulled into another war and the cost of it overall. And it also failed because it had no real power. It had no military to enforce really anything. So those are the reasons it failed. So again, still wanting to stop the war. There were a lot of international disagreements, and there was some problems at home and whatnot. But at the same time, they all remember World War I, and they want to avoid World War II. And so there was different treaties and different pacts that were made. A well-known one is the Kellogg Brienne Pact of 1928. And pretty much all the nations in the world signed it, which is great. An agreement to stop using war as a national policy. Just take it off the table. It's not even an option, right? And there was this idea of disarming. So disarmament is this, reducing troops, reducing your military capabilities, reducing your weapons. And this was part of the pact as well. But just like this cartoon character shows, it kind of 1939 Germany kind of blows it up in its face, right? So that's after all these other previous aggressions. So the Great Depression does hit. Something to realize, it wasn't just a U.S. thing. Yes, stock market crash, that was kind of the start of it in the United States, but they were the #1 economy, really powering the entire world at this point, or at least keeping the money flowing, which is really important in an economy. So you should understand that U.S. investors have little money to invest anymore. They don't want to take the risk. It's better to hold on to it. So European nations, so if they're not investing we're not taking on debt from other countries. European nations can't pay off their war debts. They can't invest. They can't make an economic profit. So European production plummets. All right, and that's not, so European can't pay off war debts. We're talking about Germany, right, and other central powers. And then Europe production plummets, because if they're not getting payments from Germany, like France, for example, they're not going to produce as much. And then Europeans can't afford American goods, right? And that one's, and so really it just makes it worse and worse. So it's a cyclical spin. And this is for U.S. consumers as well. They're not able to afford as much. And so what happens, just similarly in America, but what we see in Europe, particularly Germany, is industry slows. And we can see this decline of industrial output, the dark green areas. Also the unemployment rate, not the rate, but the millions of people. So this is 5 million at one time were unemployed in Germany, 2.7 in the UK. And so they have this extremely high unemployment. And then Germany actually experienced this hyperinflation. It just like took right off, where a dollar became $1 trillion after just a few years, or it took $1 trillion to buy the same amount of gold that you would have with a dollar or a mark, just maybe 8 years before that. And so they actually issue a new currency, and it stabilizes it for a time. They experience more inflation later, but not nearly as bad. So that was, again, industry slowing, high unemployment, production was horrible. So just to compare you don't need to know this one, but just to show, like, the American response was new leadership. They elected someone else, FDR, and they had the New Deal. So a way to ensure people could work and get the things they need, and the economy starts to actually recover. Actually 2 years before we even get into the war, a depression is over technically once your GDP starts increasing, and it was at this time. So it was on its way, and the war also helps the American economy as well. But it was headed in the right direction. Others had a different response. So lots of countries turn to, well, they don't turn, a totalitarian takes over, or, the response is totalitarianism. There, I got it out. Is a form of government where a leader or small council, typically one person though, has total control, and it's controlling all aspects. So politically, any sort of power structure, economically, what happens in industry, what happens with employment, what happens with what's produced, and then in social life, right? So deciding what people could say, what they could read, what could they view, what could they believe, even in some cases. And when people think of totalitarians, don't think it's just a extreme left or extreme right. Well, it's both extremes, right? So we see fascists on one side and we see communists on the other. So we're going to go over the differences later, okay? But either way, all three of these individuals had very much ownership over their countries, what people did and read, believed, things like that. All right, so we'll get over that later. All right. So another little thing we should bring in there too is like Japan, right? Hey, they're going to be a big part of World War II, obviously, as well. We don't necessarily say fascism or communism for them. It's more of a militarism. It's really the military, the defense is dominated the political, social, and economies of a militaristic government. So like we see that in Korea now. But they're also communists as well, so it's a little different. But it's just the focus on how the strength of the military is the strength of the nation. Okay, so everyone's efforts are put towards that. And it's, one response Japan has to it, not only the militarized, but like their response to the Depression was attack Manchuria. Okay, go into China more. All right, they already took part of China earlier. And extract more natural resources, things they need. That's one thing about Japan. They don't have the natural resources for all their ambitions. Russia's response was a planned economy. So they were already communists before, so it's not like the Depression caused them to be communists. Communism really came from the revolution that they had. Things were bad enough already that they turned to this. And, Stalin instituted a planned economy. So they had this 5-year plan. It's supposed to collectivize all these farms and have it more state-run. And all these extra farmers were sent to labor camps, and where the life expectancy was 1 winter. And millions died. Okay, millions died in the Gulag and also just died from starvation as well. So, And then we go to Italy and Germany. Their response was fascism. All right, so fascism is a government style that had dictator has complete power, suppress criticism, control the media. It's really just like this ultra nationalism, okay? And in their case, and in many cases with fascism, it's usually race-based or some sort of racist or ethnocentric way of looking at things. So, for example, with Hitler, it was the other, which they put the blame on, was Jews, and that sort of racism or ethnocentrism was directed towards them. And so, again, just names you should know that are coming up in the next sections. Italy, it's Mussolini. Germany, it's Hitler, and they were both considered fascists. Mussolini is actually fascist first, or a fascist leader that was in charge before Hitler. Yeah. And then there's this last video, watch this on your own, but it's we already looked at Hitler's rise to power in an economic political lens, but like this one gets more into the social aspect of it. So you can probably skip the first minute of the video, but I think does a fair job of seeing how his view of the Jews and people's attraction to him, let's say, as a political leader. All right, that's it. See ya.